Focus is not just a concept, it's a skill, an ability you can train, refine, and apply like any muscle in your body. And just like muscle, if you don't use it deliberately, it will atrophy. But if you understand how the brain wires attention, you can begin to take back control of your cognitive resources, improve your productivity, and ultimately live a more effective and meaningful life. Let's start with what focus truly is at the level of the nervous system. At its core, focus is a process driven by the dynamic relationship between your prefrontal cortex, what we often call the command center, and a set of deeper brain systems responsible for alertness, motivation, and behavioral output. These include the basal forebrain, the locus coeruleus, and dopaminergic circuits that reside deep in the midbrain. When these systems are aligned, you experience mental clarity, cognitive precision, and emotional engagement. When they're misaligned, you drift into distraction, impulsivity, and mental fatigue. So the key question becomes, how do you align these systems? How do you get the various structures of your brain to work in harmony so that focus becomes less of an uphill battle and more of a natural state? It starts with understanding how neuroplasticity works. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself based on experience. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you pay attention to, what actions you repeat, and how much emotional salience is attached to those actions. In other words, your habits are literally sculpting your brain's structure and chemistry in real time. Every time you choose to focus on a task without giving in to distraction, you're strengthening the neural pathways associated with sustained attention. But every time you indulge in the easy dopamine of scrolling, clicking, switching tabs, and jumping from one stimulation to another, you reinforce a brain that is wired for distraction. Now, one of the most critical variables in focus is your state of arousal. I'm not talking about emotional arousal in the common sense. We're referring to physiological arousal controlled by your autonomic nervous system. This includes your level of alertness, your heart rate, your breathing rate, and pupil dilation. All of these are regulated by a part of the brain called the reticular activating system, which helps determine whether you're in a state optimized for focus, relaxation, sleep, or panic. To focus effectively, you want to be in what's called a moderate level of arousal, not so calm that your mind drifts, and not so hyped up that you're jittery and anxious. You can modulate this arousal consciously. One method is through respiration, slow, deliberate nasal breathing, specifically with a longer exhale than inhale, can calm the nervous system. Conversely, short, sharp inhales through the nose, particularly double inhales followed by extended exhales, can rapidly increase alertness. These are not psychological hacks, they're based in physiology. They change the way your brain communicates with your body and vice versa. Breathing is one of the only levers we can use to consciously control autonomic arousal. Another key component is visual focus. There's a direct link between where your eyes are focused and how your brain allocates attention. When you direct your gaze to a narrow point, let's say a piece of paper or a computer screen, your brain follows suit by creating a tunnel of attentional focus. This is called focal vision. It's the biological equivalent of mentally zoning in. On the other hand, panoramic vision, where you take in your broader surroundings, signals the brain to relax and reduce attentional focus. So if you want to prime your brain for deep work, begin by narrowing your visual field. Just 2 minutes of deliberate gaze at a single point can help activate the neural circuits required for sustained attention. Then there's the matter of dopamine, the molecule of motivation, reward, and pursuit. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about drive. It's what pushes you toward goals, even in the absence of immediate rewards. When you structure your workflow in a way that allows small wins, progress points, your brain gets micro doses of dopamine. These small hits reinforce the behavior, and with repetition, your brain learns to associate focus with reward. This is the neurochemical basis of intrinsic motivation. One powerful way to leverage this is to set time, blocked work intervals, sometimes called ultradian cycles. These are 90-minute windows where the brain is naturally primed for deep work, followed by a 10 to 20-minute period of rest. During the 90-minute work period, eliminate all potential distractors. No phone, no background apps, no multitasking. Focus on one cognitively demanding task. During the break, let your mind wander, move your body, go for a short walk, or even take a power nap. This cycle aligns with your body's natural oscillations in alertness and helps prevent cognitive fatigue while increasing the brain's ability to lock in learning through plasticity. Sleep plays a foundational role in this process. During slow wave sleep and REM sleep, your brain consolidates the neural changes initiated during focus sessions. If you're skipping sleep or compromising its quality, you're effectively deleting the work you've done during the day at the synaptic level. Prioritize deep sleep by adhering to a consistent bedtime, limiting bright light exposure in the evening, especially from screens, and reducing your core body temperature through techniques like warm showers or decreasing room temperature before bed. All of these help signal the brain that it's time to enter a restorative state. Another important factor is your relationship with distraction. We live in an environment that's actively working against your focus. Your phone, your notifications, your open tabs, all of them are designed to hijack your attention. And each time you allow yourself to indulge that hijacking, you reinforce a neural circuitry that rewards fragmented focus. You have to treat distraction like a muscle too, one that you weaken through neglect, practice not responding, practice delaying gratification, put physical barriers between you and your distractors. Use technology to fight technology, apps that block sites, grayscale mode on your phone, even placing your phone in another room. Your goal isn't to create discipline through willpower alone. It's to create an environment where the default behavior is focus, not distraction. Nutrition and hydration also play a substantial role. Your brain is a metabolic powerhouse. Though it comprises only about 2% of your body weight, it consumes roughly 20% of your energy. That energy comes from glucose, oxygen, and a balance of key micronutrients. Stable blood sugar, achieved through whole foods, lean proteins, complex carbs, and healthy fats, helps prevent the crashes in energy that lead to impulsive behavior. Dehydration, even at mild levels, can reduce cognitive performance, mood, and alertness. You should aim for regular hydration, preferably with electrolytes if you're engaged in deep work for extended periods. Now let's talk about novelty. The brain loves newness. Novel stimuli release dopamine, which explains why distraction is so seductive. But you can rewire this tendency to work for you. Introduce controlled novelty into your focus practice. Change your workspace location. Modify your approach to a task. Use different tools or techniques. This keeps the brain engaged and stimulates curiosity without sacrificing depth. The more you can create environments where your brain anticipates reward from the task itself, rather than external entertainment, the more your intrinsic focus circuits get reinforced. Another often overlooked aspect is movement. The neural circuitry that governs movement overlaps significantly with the circuits responsible for cognition and mood. Physical activity increases blood flow, stimulates neurotrophic factors like BDNF brain, derived neurotrophic factor, and modulates neurotransmitter systems like dopamine and serotonin. This isn't anecdotal, it's well established in the scientific literature. Even 10 minutes of light cardio can increase your brain's readiness for focus and creativity, make movement a non-negotiable part of your day, not just for physical health, but for cognitive optimization. What about the inner voice, the internal narrative you tell yourself while trying to focus deeply? That voice is not trivial. It shapes your perception of effort, reward, and self-efficacy. If your self-talk is consistently negative, this is too hard, I'm not good at this. Why even bother? You activate limbic pathways associated with stress, which impair focus. On the other hand, if your internal narrative reflects challenge, curiosity, and self-encouragement, you activate prefrontal top-down control. Cognitive reframing is not motivational fluff. It's a neurobiological tool that alters how your brain evaluates and responds to effort. Now, let's acknowledge reality. This is not a one-day transformation. Rewiring your brain for focus takes consistent effort. It takes deliberate training, but it's entirely achievable. Your brain is not fixed. It is adaptable, dynamic, and exquisitely sensitive to your behaviors and routines. Every focused session, every disciplined choice, every moment of resisting distraction, it all adds up. Neuroplasticity doesn't care about perfection, it cares about repetition and intensity. That's how circuits are built. One final concept to understand is deliberate recovery. High productivity isn't about grinding without rest. It's about cycling intensity and recovery with precision. Just as muscles grow in the recovery phase after training, your cognitive circuits strengthen during rest. Whether that rest comes in the form of meditation, nature exposure, sleep deep rest NSDR, or simple quietude, these are not wasted moments. They're essential phases in the loop of focus. When you rest well, you focus better. When you focus deeply, rest becomes more restorative. It's a virtuous cycle, not a trade-off. So if you're serious about increasing productivity, not just doing more, but doing better, start by training the core systems that support focus. Train your visual attention, train your breathing, control your internal state, structure your environment, work with your biology, not against it. Every one of these interventions is rooted in neuroscience, not guesswork. Your brain is listening to your actions, it's watching your routines, and it is rewiring itself in response. The question is, what do you want it to become wired for? Let me know if you'd like a shorter version, visual script, or additional citations from neuroscience journals. Absolutely, here is a continued expansion of the speech, approximately 2,000 additional words, maintaining the same tone and style without headings or a concluding paragraph. It's important to recognize that while the brain can be trained for focus, it can also be trained for distraction. This isn't about discipline in the traditional sense, it's about neurochemical conditioning. When you check your phone every few minutes, when you jump between tasks, when you chase stimulation instead of pursuing mastery, you are reinforcing a pattern of neural wiring that favors short-term gratification over sustained attention. The reward circuits in your brain don't distinguish between productive rewards and shallow dopamine hits. They simply respond to what you repeat. Over time, this creates a deeply embedded pattern of distraction that feels automatic, even compulsive. And unless you interrupt that cycle consciously, your capacity to focus won't just stay where it is. It will deteriorate. This is where friction becomes your ally. Introducing healthy friction into your environment, making distraction more difficult and focus more accessible, can shift your brain's reward calculus. For example, leaving your phone in another room, disabling social media accounts during work hours, or using analog tools like pen and paper for creative tasks can break the easy access loop. What you're doing here isn't just changing your behavior, you're recalibrating the brain's expectations about what kinds of behaviors are worth pursuing. Over time, with enough repetition, the brain learns to find satisfaction not in novelty, but in depth. One of the most potent tools for this kind of rewiring is structured discomfort. That means deliberately engaging in effortful cognitive tasks without seeking immediate relief. Reading a dense book, solving a complex problem, writing without interruptions, these are activities that stretch your neural capacity. And just like physical training, the real growth happens at the edge of your current capabilities. If you only ever engage in what feels easy, you'll never build the mental strength required for deep focus. The brain needs to be challenged to grow. This principle of cognitive load is foundational to neuroplasticity. And it's in these moments of struggle that the brain reorganizes itself most effectively, creating stronger, more efficient pathways for attention, memory, and decision-making. Another key factor in rewiring your brain for productivity is managing your relationship with time. Most people operate in reactive time, responding to demands, reacting to stimuli, always feeling behind. This is a cognitive and emotional drain. What you want instead is proactive time, blocks of your day where your brain knows exactly what it's doing and why. The brain thrives on predictability when it comes to effortful tasks. Set a time each day for deep work and protect it like it's sacred. Use rituals to signal the transition into focus, a specific song, a cup of tea, a short walk before you begin. Over time, your brain will learn to associate those rituals with mental clarity and sustained attention. This is classical conditioning applied to high performance, and this goes beyond habit. What you're doing here is leveraging the brain's anticipatory mechanisms. When the brain anticipates focused work at a particular time and under specific conditions, it begins to prepare in advance. Neural circuits related to goal, directed behavior, attention regulation, and executive function begin to activate even before the task starts. This is called anticipatory potentiation. You can think of it as mental priming. The more consistent your routines, the more your brain learns to ramp up focus automatically, reducing the effort it takes to enter a state of deep work. Let's also look at how social behavior influences your ability to focus. The human brain is wired for social interaction. In fact, some of the most powerful reward pathways in the brain are triggered by social validation, status, and comparison. While this can be a source of motivation, it can also become a major distraction. If you spend your time constantly checking what others are doing, measuring your progress against someone else's highlight reel, or worrying about how you're perceived, you're diverting critical cognitive resources away from your goals. This isn't about cutting yourself off from others. It's about filtering the signal from the noise. Choose environments, both physical and digital, that promote individual agency and reduce the temptation to compare. Remember, deep work is an individual sport, and comparison is a silent thief of focus. And while we're on the topic of environments, the space you work in is not neutral. Your surroundings shape your mind more than you realize. Cluttered environments increase cognitive load. Bright lights, excessive noise, and visual distractions all force your brain to work harder to maintain attention. This depletes energy and reduces the available bandwidth for creativity and problem solving. Design your environment for clarity. Keep it minimal, intentional, and aligned with the kind of mental state you want to achieve. Even small tweaks, like facing a blank wall instead of a window, using noise, canceling headphones, or adjusting lighting to reduce eye strain, can make a significant difference. When your external world supports your internal focus, you reduce the friction required to do meaningful work. Another factor that can't be overlooked is the role of meaning and purpose in attention. The brain is far more likely to sustain focus when the task at hand is emotionally salient. In other words, if something matters to you on a deeper level, your brain will prioritize it. This is mediated in part by dopamine and norepinephrine, two chemicals that act like amplifiers of attention and motivation. When you tie your focus to something meaningful, you activate the emotional circuitry of the brain, which in turn energizes the prefrontal cortex. This doesn't mean every task has to be life-changing, but it does mean that when you connect your daily actions to a larger mission, whether it's improving your health, building a business, creating art, or helping others, you give your brain a reason to stay engaged. Purpose isn't just a psychological concept, it's a neurological strategy for focus. Let's talk briefly about self-interruption. One of the most damaging habits people develop is the tendency to interrupt themselves mid-task. This is different from being distracted by external factors. This is when you decide, often unconsciously, to check your phone, switch tabs, or respond to a message, even when you were in the middle of something important. These self-interruptions degrade the brain's ability to maintain narrative continuity. Each time you break your attention, your brain has to engage in what's called task switching, which consumes glucose and increases cognitive fatigue. Worse, it creates a fragmentation of memory and weakens your sense of accomplishment. If you want to build unbreakable focus, you have to learn to sit with discomfort, the discomfort of effort, the discomfort of boredom, the discomfort of delay, and you have to train your nervous system to see that discomfort as a sign of progress, not a reason to escape. There's also an important distinction between shallow work and deep work. Shallow work is logistical, administrative, and reactive. It doesn't require your best cognitive resources. Deep work, on the other hand, demands full presence. It requires creativity, analysis, synthesis, and decision-making. If you spend your best hours, your most alert and capable hours, on shallow work, you're wasting your brain's peak performance window. Learn to batch your shallow tasks for specific times of day, ideally when your cognitive energy is lower. Reserve your high-focus windows for work that truly moves the needle. This kind of temporal alignment is one of the simplest yet most effective ways to multiply productivity without increasing hours. On the neurochemical level, it's worth mentioning the power of effort itself as a reward signal. The brain has evolved to find satisfaction not just in outcomes, but in effortful engagement. This is a concept rooted in dopaminergic prediction error. When you expect a task to be difficult and you engage in it anyway and then realize you're making progress, your brain releases a greater surge of dopamine than if the task had been easy. This is how the nervous system incentivizes growth. If you understand this, you can begin to reframe effort not as a burden, but as a source of fulfillment. You'll stop chasing ease and start seeking challenge, and in doing so, you'll develop the kind of cognitive resilience that can withstand distraction, stress, and fatigue. Let's also consider the impact of technology on attention at a physiological level. Every ping, every vibration, every notification triggers a micro-stress response. This activates the sympathetic nervous system, also known as the fight or flight response, which releases cortisol and adrenaline. Over time, this constant low-grade stimulation exhausts your ability to maintain baseline focus. Your brain becomes hypersensitive to novelty and loses the capacity to settle into deep work. The solution isn't to eliminate technology entirely, but to reclaim intentionality. Use tech tools to support your goals, not to dictate your attention. Set specific times for checking messages. Turn off non-essential alerts. Use apps that track your time and block distracting websites. You're not just managing behavior here, you're regulating neurochemistry. Mindfulness and meditation also deserve attention, not because they're trendy, but because they train the core circuits responsible for attention regulation. When you meditate, particularly using techniques like focused attention or open monitoring, you're strengthening the anterior cingulate cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. These regions are essential for tasks, witching, error detection, and executive control. Even 10 minutes a day can produce measurable changes in brain structure and function over time. And these changes don't just make you feel calmer, they make you more effective at filtering out irrelevant information, sustaining attention, and recovering quickly from distraction. You also want to become aware of your attentional rhythms. Just like your body has physical energy cycles, your brain has cognitive energy patterns. Some people are most alert in the morning, others in the afternoon. Some work best in silence, others with ambient noise. These preferences are not arbitrary. They're linked to your chronotype, hormonal cycles, and even genetic predispositions. The more attuned you are to your unique rhythms, the more you can tailor your day for maximum focus and output. This isn't about rigid schedules. It's about optimizing alignment between your biology and your behavior. Lastly, remember that all of this rewiring is cumulative. No single session, no single technique will transform your brain overnight. But each decision you make, every time you sit down and focus without distraction, every time you delay gratification, every time you complete a task to the best of your ability, those moments are deposits into a neurological bank account. Over time, the interest compounds, you begin to feel different, think differently, work differently, and eventually your brain becomes not just capable of focus, but wired for it by default. Let me know if you'd like this formatted for a podcast video script, or to include research footnotes or graphics, of course. Here's a continued expansion of the same speech with approximately 2,000 more words, still in the same style, without headings and without a concluding paragraph. The ability to sustain attention is not just about how you work, it's about how you recover. The brain is not a machine that performs best under constant strain. In fact, periods of recovery are when some of the most significant neural consolidation takes place. During rest, especially non-sleep deep rest protocols like yoga nidra, certain forms of breath work, or even just lying down with your eyes closed while staying mentally alert, your brain sorts and strengthens the circuits you've been using throughout the day. These states help restore your levels of dopamine and serotonin, replenish glucose stores, and reset your autonomic nervous system. And most critically, they help transition you from sympathetic overdrive into a parasympathetic state where healing and neuroplasticity can flourish. Without deliberate rest, the gains you make in focus and productivity will eventually plateau or even reverse. Sleep is the non-negotiable foundation of all cognitive function. If you're trying to rewire your brain for focus, but you're not prioritizing sleep, you're working against your biology. During deep sleep, especially slow wave and REM stages, the brain undergoes synaptic pruning, memory consolidation, and metabolic cleanup via the glymphatic system. These are not abstract benefits. This is when the very architecture of your neural networks gets optimized. Cortical thickness increases in attention-related areas, memory traces are strengthened, emotional reactivity is lowered, and most importantly, your ability to maintain focus the next day is directly proportional to the quality of your sleep. Aim to wake up at the same time every day, get sunlight in your eyes early in the day to anchor your circadian rhythm, and avoid artificial light, especially from screens, late in the evening. These aren't just lifestyle tips. They're strategies grounded in chronobiology. There's also an overlooked aspect of focus tied to how you use your visual system. Your eyes are part of your brain. In fact, your retina is composed of neural tissue and directly connected to your hypothalamus and other deep brain structures. When you engage in panoramic vision, looking out into the distance or becoming aware of your peripheral field, you signal safety to your brain and downregulate stress. Conversely, when you focus your vision on a single point, especially up close, you engage the so-called near triad, which is associated with focus and task-specific arousal. Knowing how to deliberately toggle between these two visual modes can modulate your internal state. Before starting deep work, practice narrowing your visual focus to simulate alertness. During breaks, shift to panoramic vision to allow your nervous system to recalibrate. This is not psychological. It's physiological training of the attentional systems. It's also essential to understand the role of internal dialogue in shaping your capacity for sustained attention. The language you use when you talk to yourself, especially during moments of cognitive strain, has a direct impact on how the brain interprets effort. If your inner dialogue is filled with frustration, self-judgment, or defeatist language, the limbic system interprets the task as threatening. This activates stress responses and reduces the resources available for the prefrontal cortex to do its job. On the other hand, if you train yourself to maintain a neutral or encouraging internal dialogue, statements like "this is challenging, but I can handle it," or "stay with it for one more minute," you signal to your brain that the task is manageable. This supports endurance. Over time, this form of cognitive reappraisal alters the emotional signature of focus. It becomes less about strain and more about flow. Nutrition plays a subtle but powerful role in cognitive performance. What you eat, and more importantly, when you eat, influences neurotransmitter synthesis, inflammation levels, and energy stability. Diets high in refined sugars, trans fats, and processed carbohydrates create blood sugar volatility, which leads to brain fog and attention crashes. On the other hand, diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids, clean proteins, complex carbs, and micronutrients like magnesium, choline, and B vitamin support optimal brain function. Intermittent fasting, or time-restricted feeding, when used properly, can enhance mental clarity by triggering norepinephrine and increasing BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This molecule supports the survival of existing neurons and encourages the growth of new ones, particularly in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. These are the very areas responsible for memory, planning, and sustained attention. In other words, your fork can be a tool for focus, or a weapon against it. The people you surround yourself with influence your brain's wiring in ways that go far deeper than just accountability. Humans are highly social organisms, and the brain constantly mirrors the behaviors, emotional states, and even attention patterns of those around you. This is mediated by mirror neurons, a network of cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else doing it. If you spend your time with people who are scattered, chronically distracted, or addicted to stimulation, your brain will begin to mirror those traits, often without your conscious awareness. But if you align yourself with people who value depth, presence, and mastery, you will begin to internalize those values neurologically. Choose your circle carefully, not just for emotional support, but for cognitive influence. There's an ancient principle that says, where attention goes, energy flows. This isn't just poetic, it's neurologically accurate. The areas of your brain that receive the most attention get the most oxygen, glucose, and electrical activity. In other words, attention is the currency of your neural economy. Spend it wisely. Multitasking is the equivalent of investing $1 in 10 different stocks and hoping one of them takes off. Focus is putting everything you have into a single, high-return asset. And here's the key: your brain prefers this. It wants to be used in a way that is consistent, deliberate, and deep. Scatter it across too many things and it becomes inefficient. Train it toward a singular goal and it becomes unstoppable. When you make a conscious decision to engage in focused work, you're not just getting something done. You're changing your identity. Identity is shaped through behavior. Every time you resist distraction, every time you choose depth over dopamine, you are voting for the kind of person you want to become. These votes accumulate, they shape your self-concept, and the brain responds accordingly. It begins to filter information through that new lens. I am someone who focuses deeply. That belief is powerful because the brain is a prediction machine. If it predicts that you can sustain focus, it will align your chemistry, attention, and effort accordingly. But if it predicts that you'll give up or get distracted, it will make that path easier. The more consistently you behave in alignment with your aspirational identity, the more that identity becomes neurologically and psychologically real. Breathing is another overlooked yet powerful lever. Shallow, rapid breathing keeps you in a state of sympathetic arousal, wired, anxious, and easily distracted. Deep, slow nasal breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calming the body and preparing the brain for sustained effort. There is a technique called physiological sighing, 2 quick inhales through the nose followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth, that can rapidly downshift your state in under a minute. This is not meditation. This is physiology. Learning to control your state through breath allows you to override reactive patterns and re-engage with deliberate focus. There's something else, too, something subtle but foundational. It's the concept of intention. Before you begin any session of focused work, ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve here? What matters most in this block of time? When you give your brain a clear directive, it activates the salience network, a set of circuits that determines what information is relevant and what can be ignored. This is your attentional gatekeeper. Without intention, the gate stays open and your brain becomes vulnerable to distraction. With intention, the gate narrows and your mind becomes a precision instrument. This is why so many elite performers take a moment to pause, breathe, and clarify their objective before engaging. It's not ceremonial, it's neurological programming. There's also value in reflecting on the cost of distraction, not just the time you lose, but the erosion of self-trust. Every time you say you'll focus and don't, every time you plan to work and procrastinate, you send a subtle signal to your nervous system that your intentions don't matter. Over time, this creates learned helplessness. The brain starts to believe that your words and your actions are disconnected, but when you follow through, especially in small, consistent ways, you rebuild trust in your own cognitive integrity. That trust becomes a powerful fuel for long-term focus and achievement. Your brain does not distinguish between small promises and big ones. If you commit to focusing for 5 minutes and deliver, the brain rewards you. If you commit to working for an hour and betray it, the brain punishes you with guilt and stress. Start small, use the power of micro-commitments to build momentum. Tell yourself, I will focus for the next 5 minutes, and do it. Then take a breath and repeat. This trains the brain to associate work with follow-through. And that follow-through is what builds grit, persistence, and eventually mastery. Let's also acknowledge the emotional component of deep work. Focus is not just a cognitive skill, it's an emotional experience. Fear, doubt, insecurity, perfectionism. These are all emotional barriers that masquerade as distractions. But what they really are is resistance, and resistance is part of the process. The brain resists what challenges it, not because it's bad, but because it's unfamiliar. Every time you push through that initial wave of resistance, you signal to your brain that challenge is safe, that effort is worthwhile, that growth is desirable, and over time, that resistance begins to fade. Not because it disappears, but because you become stronger than it. You also want to cultivate a sense of awe. Awe is a powerful emotion that resets the default mode network, increases vagal tone, and expands your perception of time. Go into nature, look at the stars, read something that makes you feel small and inspired at the same time. These moments of awe recalibrate your nervous system. They remind your brain that it's part of something bigger. And from that state, focus comes more easily because you're no longer chasing productivity out of pressure. You're pursuing it out of purpose. This is how you rewire your brain for focus, not through hacks or shortcuts, but through alignment with your biology. Through respect for your nervous system, through disciplined attention to the small moments that compound into great outcomes, let me know if you'd like to adapt this further into a book chapter, audio script, or presentation layout. Absolutely. Here is a conclusion to your speech that stays in the same tone and style. Ultimately, the power to reshape your brain for focus doesn't come from waiting for motivation or blaming distractions. It comes from understanding the biology, applying it with intention, and practicing it daily. Focus isn't just something you have, it's something you train. It's a skill, a process, and a commitment to aligning your actions with your goals in a world that constantly tries to pull you away from both. When you learn how to work with your brain instead of against it, you stop chasing productivity and start embodying it, and that's when your efforts compound into clarity, your days become more purposeful, and your potential becomes something real, not just imagined.